Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Old Hunt, where we are still celebrating 10 years of Bloodborne. We are playing version 1.00 of the Japanese release, and last time we didn't make a lot of in-game progress. We mostly talked a lot about lore and things that we weren't really going to see in this playthrough, a little bit of stuff that we did see in this playthrough, but we got into some complicated theories about Oedon and what's going on with the imposter doctor and the clinic and all sorts of things like that. We're almost through with the theorizing stuff and the sort of relevant lore speculation and things like that. We've got a little bit more of that to do this time. We've got a little bit more of the NPC storylines to advance as well. And I thought I'd start off... I thought last time I was of the opinion that I should just teleport straight back and then continue on with the imposter storyline. But I actually realized I've been saying for a long time I should drain my insight, and this might be a good opportunity to do it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go here and I'm going to spend insight on something that I know I'm not going to regret, Bloodstone Shards, because I've got plenty of weapons that I'm going to want to be upgrading. And we're going to burn all 27 of our insight on this setup here in one go. All right. And having done that, having reduced our insight back down to 0, we'll, of course, be watching those bath messengers disappear. There's another thing that's going to happen, but we're going to have to reload the area to see it take effect. And I figured while we're reloading the area, we may as well return to the Cathedral Ward Oedon Chapel to pay a visit to another character that we've sort of been neglecting in this playthrough. So I'll see you once that teleportation is over. Right. We have had some tough tasks to deal with in this playthrough, and I've been doing a lot of things I don't like to do. This is another one of those things. This character asked us to find people and send them here as a safe haven. We've opted not to go that route. Obviously, we're going to be collaborating with the imposter doctor. And it's important for the lore that this character meet an untimely end. So we're going to do that. I just want to make sure, first of all, that there's no extra dialogue that I have missed. Just check for that real quick. So let's just do a quick check-in here.
There ain't a peep to be heard, not in the old town. I doubt there's any more out there. God save us. Yharnam's done for.
Yep, there it is. Yharnam's going quiet, and we know it, and that's a little bit of an indication there that there's no sane person left to be saved that we're getting from this character. And that, on that sort of sad note, we're going to say goodbye.
I just wanted to help people.
Mm-hmm. And that's a pretty straightforward translation, too. I mean, straightforward in the sense that there's no, like, surprise in its meaning. It's good, right? Because I've talked in Translation Born. I don't want to get too sidetracked by this, but I do think it's important to bring up. I've talked in Translation Born a lot about how when you're translating something, you want to be bearing in mind the line that it needs to be, right? The underlying idea and the purpose of the line in the story. So this is a line that is prompted by the player killing this NPC. And I don't necessarily know if the trigger would have been identified for the translators, but it probably was, especially, again, considering, and I've said this multiple times now, it's a voiced line, right? And so they probably had more information when they were translating as to what that sort of voiced line was supposed to be, what the circumstances were around it. So the translators knew that this line needed to be appropriate for a character who was being cut down, who really just wanted to be helpful. Part of the purpose of this character, I think, is to come across a little bit creepy. First time you run into him, he looks suspicious. He sounds suspicious the way he's laughing, and you maybe second guess his request because superficially he seems like maybe he's not to be trusted. And the imposter doctor sort of takes advantage of the trust that you may have built up with the initial doctor, the actual Yusufka in Yusufka's clinic. So maybe we're a little bit less sort of put off by her. I mean, the fact that she offers a reward and she also has lots of creepy laughter once we start sending people to her end up tipping off the player, I think, as to something shady's going on with her. But similarly, if we start sending people here to Oedon Chapel, we'll have some interactions with this person and realize this guy's actually better than he seems. But at any point, right, part of the point of that line, right, and this is what I wanted to get to, is the idea of the narrative function of the line here, is to sort of twist the knife a little bit, right? You want people to know when they kill this character that they've killed someone who really sincerely just wanted to help people. That was his primary concern. And if I remember correctly, if you go down his storyline enough, the line actually changes. It's a similar purpose, but I think it's accomplished in a slightly different way. But we're not going to get that line in this playthrough, so it's not worth dwelling on. I just wanted to point out, again, even in a seemingly straightforward translation, right, you want to be thinking about what's the effect this line is going to have, right? You want to leave the player with the effect that's appropriate to the line in English as it would have been appropriate in Japanese. So when you're coming up with the exact wording that you want to use for this dying line, when you're working with the voice actor and trying to get the right delivery for this dying line, you need to know what's the point. And I think they do a great job with that, right? So the translation, right, may not have been like this amazing transformation from one thing to another, but does it serve the purpose of making you feel bad for killing this character, of making you understand that when this person was asking you to tell people to come here because this is a safe place, they were motivated genuinely by trying to help people? Yeah, I think it succeeds, right? I think it's a successful translation in that sense. And so very quick, minor little thing, but I wanted to bring it up because I think it's an interesting aspect of translation that doesn't always get talked about when people talk about issues with translation. You want to be always serving the point of any given line, right? The point of the sort of narrative function as it's happening in a translation. But ignoring that and going on to the reason I killed this character, you will note, here it is, it's proof. I may have mentioned this briefly in the last episode, but in case you doubted, this character has Formless Oedon, the rune, in his mind. And also to the point, right, this character's motivations, as I was just saying, I think are genuine. I don't think it's just, right, the purpose of that line, I don't think it's just about twisting the knife and making you feel bad. I also think it's meant to let you know that this character was genuinely motivated to help people. And that reminds us of a passage. Let me go back to my multiplying stash of Formless Oedon runes now. We'll use the one we just got because it's appropriate. Right, the very final line, therefore, we can forget about because that's not the relevant part, but that's how it opens. Therefore, Oedon, there's maybe an implied and, it's really just a reset of the subject. It's unaware believers, right? Secretly seek that, right? Which is, what's that? It's probably the, oozing blood that is the essence of Oedon. But anyway, the important thing that I wanted to get at in this sense is the unaware, right? So the people who are sort of serving Oedon's interests, who are acting as his believers without knowing it. They could essentially be, right, because the Japanese is a little bit vague, and if I remember correctly, the English is too, right? It's not entirely clear whether these people even know that they're essentially worshiping Oedon, or maybe worshiping is the wrong word, doing what Oedon wants when they act, right? It's a very covert, secretive sort of thing, right? People might be furthering Oedon's agenda without necessarily being aware of it. And what ends up happening because of the genuine desire, right, in this alternate world where we send Ariana here and she ends up bearing Oedon's child, why does that happen? That happens because this character asks us to go around and start sending people to the safe place that is Oedon Chapel. And Oedon Chapel, it turns out, actually is the safer place to send people, right? They don't get transformed into aliens. They don't die or transform in their houses. They don't necessarily end up great. But they have a chance at survival if you send them to Oedon Chapel. It's their best chance to make it through the night. And so all of this genuine desire to help people, to bring them together, right? Because I think that's another desire of the Oedon Chapel dweller, motivated by, like, looking for company. I I don't get the sense that this character is like secretly out to do Erden's bidding. I think this character genuinely wants to help people and genuinely wants to be surrounded by a lot of other people, right? You get some dialogues if you get on that other path that sort of indicate that he's a little bit lonely and is looking for maybe a friend and maybe just to have some other people around. Is also a very sort of shy, retiring character, self-abasing character, so would never really put himself forward, but is happy when a lot of other people are around and is feeling like he's helped to accomplish something. I think all that's genuine. And the fact that Erden ends up getting what Erden wants, right, the oozing blood and the potential to conceive a child by using Ariana essentially, like unwittingly, right? All of that happens, I think, through this storyline. It's all very covert, right? And the player's actions, right? Our actions, if we had followed that particular storyline, would also have led to that end result. And we certainly are unaware of serving Erden when we're doing all this, right? There's this level of covert, quiet thing, like things that are happening in the background that you're unaware of, that you don't even really know to suspect until you've played through the game and explored that particular story route once, or maybe even several times, because depending on, you know, what you do as you pursue the Erden Chapel storyline, Ariana might not make it. There's a lot of different variations that you can account for, right? But I do think it's interesting, and I don't necessarily know how much even Erden is implied to be behind all of this, right? It's, to some extent, it seems like a lot of this is just pure circumstance, but you never quite know. You can't quite tell. And it is interesting, and I think it ends up bearing a little bit on how you interpret that line about the unaware followers of Erden. And even potentially an aware follower of Erden, because it seems like this person who's living in Erden Chapel, right, that has the formless Erden rune in his mind, right? That was the importance of picking up that drop. It shows you that this person has that in his head, right? I think even if we can say that this character was a follower of Erden, I don't necessarily think that means he knew about Erden's desire to seek oozing blood, and that Ariana had this tied to the Cainhurst bloodline that was potentially, like, perfect for Erden's desires, right? Like, I don't think that was on this character's mind. So, anyway, I feel like I've essentially started repeating myself, which is one of the dangers of doing all this live. But I think you get the point, right? And it's interesting to think about to what extent any of this was part of anyone's plan. And if it was anyone's plan, it might have been Erden's, but even Erden may not have necessarily expected things to work out this way. So, very interesting, sort of secretive, strange aspect of the game that you can think about and puzzle through, as you can with so many aspects of this game. But anyway, we're going to go back to the dream. We can now successfully reload the area, see a couple things that have changed, possibly even run into Gehrman. Let's find out. Okay, this right here, is the change that I wanted to point out. Because we have 0 insight, the doll is back up on this ledge, no longer standing around, right? No longer in a state where she can, like, really talk with you. She's no longer standing up by that grave, right? She's just hanging out. This is essentially the position we found her in at the start of the game, before we had any insight, right? So if you have insight, she stands up. If you kill her, she sprawls out on the ground. If you lose your insight, she essentially returns to the position she was in before. I think she's in a slightly different position. I don't remember the exact position that the doll was in the very first episode before we get any insight. But there is a difference, because at the beginning of the game, when we investigated the doll, it just brought up a thing that said, an abandoned doll, right? But if we investigate now, we can still level up. We can't talk, but we can channel blood echoes. It's the same outcome in this menu as when the doll is slain. So, I don't know how much this is a gameplay convenience thing, right? Because it could just be, you know, it feels a little bit gatekeepy of the developers to keep you from leveling up until you get any insight in the first place. But then have them make it so that you could potentially find yourself in a situation in the game where you're struggling against a tough boss, and in order to overcome the difficult boss, maybe you're spending insight to summon an ally, and your allies are defeated, you've used the last of your insight, you are really up against a wall and can't beat whatever boss you're trying to beat, and now, not only do you have no insight, because you can't summon anyone for additional help, but also, you can't level up, because when you go back to 0 insight, the doll loses all her abilities, and it's just like at the start of the game, and you need insight again before you can keep leveling up, like, basically soft locks the game on you. That would be a problem, right? So I think there's some reason to think that maybe they wanted to avoid that situation, and that's why this level up option is still here, even though you have 0 insight. Maybe, possibly. I don't know. This is Bloodborne. It's very difficult to say anything for sure. Also possible that we can read into this a little bit in terms of the story, that just like when we are the person who sort of kills the doll and robs her of her consciousness that way, that the doll essentially becomes dormant, but once we've activated the ability to channel blood echoes with her, we can then continue to use the doll in whatever state, and that aspect of the doll's function remains real, regardless of your level of knowledge as to the secret mysteries of the world, right? And again, I don't know how much to read into this or not read into this, but it is an important piece of the puzzle, right? It's an important data point to keep in mind when you're thinking about the puzzle that is the doll in the world of Bloodborne. So I wanted to show this off in the playthrough. I don't mind doing this anywhere near as much as I mind attacking the doll, let alone killing her. But this is what happens. And I don't think we have enough to level up, so I can't, like, 100% demonstrate that we could do it. But it does happen, and, you know, just like if we kill the doll, it's the sort of thing where you're losing out on any sort of chant, right? You don't get the come close or whatever, now shut your eyes, right? There's none of that. And there's no farewell at the end. It's all wordless again. But you still have that ability to level up. So there is that slight difference. Now we got to check for Gehrman. I think it doesn't matter how much insight you have as to whether or not he will appear. He's probably... Oh, look at this. He's here. And since Gameplay Matt was clearly not prepared for this eventuality, I'm just going to jump forward a bit to where I'm properly positioned for best hearing this dialogue.
Oh, Laurence, what's taking you so long? I've grown too old for this. Of little use now, I'm afraid.
So, clearly, Gehrman here had something to do with Laurence. And that name Laurence, of course, should sound familiar to us. Like, there's a reason this dialogue doesn't pop up until after we've defeated Vicar Amelia, because we touch Laurence's skull and go into Laurence's memory. And we see Laurence leaving Master Willem. And you can take or leave the idea from the cut content that Gehrman is the other person that Master Willem was talking about in terms of the betrayer. It's sort of unclear how much that's meant to be left in the game, but Gehrman does have a tie to Laurence and the Dream. And it's a little bit early for this, so I'm not entirely sure if I should go for it. But you know what? We're focusing on lore this episode. I'm gonna do it. We're gonna go there now, and we'll just come back to this later on when it's when we have an even fuller picture that we can draw, because we've got an item that can tell us something about the creation of this hunter's dream. So here we are. This is one of the most important and mysterious items of the game. Of course, this is Bloodborne. If it's important, it's gonna be mysterious. So I'm gonna try and give a quick literal translation here. I might need to edit myself in over this, but we'll find out. I'm gonna do my best here. All right, third umbilical cord. And the North American version of this game calls this the 1/3 of umbilical cord. I think that's another instance of it's an older version of the text. And the Japanese got an update. The UK English matched that update. The North American English did not match that update. If you just look at the Japanese, the third umbilical cord is the appropriate translation here. That's the name of this item. Okay. A great relic also known by the alternate name String of Eyes. And that's going to come back. That's going to come back and be relevant after we get to a later part of the description. So, all right, second line. Even among the great ones, only children have this. Umbilical cord draws its origin from that. Okay, it happened immediately. That's the point that I was waiting to get to, right? So this whole first section here is telling us that this thing is also known as the cord of the eye, or the eye cord, or however you want to translate string of eyes, which is a super literal way of doing it. And it's not necessarily actually an umbilical cord. The only reason it's called an umbilical cord, right, the name that we have for this item way up top, the third umbilical cord, the reason they're calling it that is because infant great ones have it. Sort of like every infant human being has an umbilical cord. And then it's cut, and right, in umbilical cord, you grow up, you don't have one anymore, right? Maybe someone will preserve it, but it's not a thing that you keep as an adult. And this cord of the eye, this string of eyes, whatever you want to call it, appears to work in a similar way, right? The baby great ones have this. None of the adult great ones seem to. So, as a result, that's where the idea of umbilical cord comes from. But, strictly speaking, this is just a string of eyes. And there could be some wordplay going on here, right? So I've sort of speculated, I really like the idea that this third thing comes from the idea of a third eye, and there's potentially a little bit of wordplay happening, right? Because we have the sanbon me, and me in Japanese is a way of making the number ordinal, right? So it's not just the 3 umbilical cord, it's the third, right? First, second, third umbilical cord. First would be ippon me, right? The hon or pon in this case is the counter. So Japanese, you have to, when you're counting things, you have to use a specific term to sort of give the listener a sense for what sort of thing you're counting, right? So hon or pon is a long, thin thing. When you're counting things that are long and thin, like, sticks, or probably most commonly in modern Japanese, like bottles of wine or bottles of most sorts, or if you have a big long glass bottle, right, you're going to use hon or pon, right? Ipponmei would be first, nihonmei would be second, sanbonmei would be third, and that's why we have third. But the me in sanbonmei is the character for I, right? So I think there's a little bit of a pun happening here in the Japanese, in the sense that this is the third umbilical cord, the third, also known, right, the third umbilical cord, which you can also understand because the umbilical cord part comes from the idea of every infant great one having it, but not when they're adults, presumably. And so you can sort of substitute out that, right, and get the idea that it's a string of eyes, leading to the idea that this could be understood as the third eye cord. That's admittedly a concept that ends up being a little more suggestive in English than it does in Japanese, since in the original there's still the counter for long cylindrical objects to serve as a reminder that this is the third eye cord, not the third eye cord. But still, you could potentially think of such cords as related to the development of eyes on the inside. Or, as Gameplay Matt put it, like maybe a mystery ocular nerve for the third eye, right? The idea that you're developing this higher consciousness, and right? It's drawing additional nutrients, right? Maybe arcane energies that you would need in order to develop your third eye. And when that awakens as a great one, you don't need it anymore because you've ascended to a higher level of being. Maybe, right? That's a lot to read into a pun. But, this is Bloodborne, right? This weird stuff happens in Bloodborne. So, there you go. That's the first section. Let's move on to the second section here, which Gameplay Matt failed to realize is exclusive to version 1.00 of the Japanese release. This is actually a pretty famous item, because while the UK English version and the Japanese language version are pretty similar in version 1.00, the American English version is completely different, likely dating back to an even older set of concepts for the game. I'm not going to go into that too much here, but I will provide a quick literal version of the Japanese. Possessing one as a ward against evil spirits is one good option, but if used, it is also possible to gain great enlightenment. And I'll let Gameplay Matt talk about why maybe enlightenment isn't the best term to end on there. I've talked before about how I think you can basically just think of enlightenment as insight. I like insight as a translation. I think it works 100%. But technically, if we're being literal, you gain a great deal of enlightenment. And the important thing about enlightenment when I say it in this description is we're not talking about enlightenment as in, like, the third eye, you awaken to the enlightenment of nirvana, right? There's a tendency, I think, when I say the word enlightenment to want to take it that way. I certainly want to take it that way. That's not how it's meant, right? Kamo is the operative term here, and that's like particularly emphasizing rational enlightenment, like the enlightenment, the period in history, right? It's this prizing of rational thought, learned knowledge, not necessarily cosmic awareness, right? So there's a little bit of a shift that's happening there. And the nice thing about insight is it sort of avoids that loaded term like enlightenment, where you're not quite sure which one of the senses you're supposed to use. So that's another reason to like the term insight. Anyway, let's move on to the final section, because that's why I brought this up in the first place. Okay. Every Great One loses its child and seeks, right? Very vague. What do they seek? It doesn't tell you. It doesn't even have a that, right? It doesn't even have a and seeks that. It just says and seeks, literally. I think you can very safely read into that, right? They lose a child and they seek, therefore, something to fill that void, right? They seek a replacement. They seek, I think the official translation is surrogate. That works too, right? The idea is they've lost a child and they need something to take its place. And possibly in the form of like just another child, right? So there's a little bit of a leap of logic happening there, but I think it's fairly safe, right? And then we're going to go on anyway, right? So every Great One loses presumably its, right? Because that's another little tiny assumption that I'm making, loses a child. Might be another way to translate it, but I'm pretty sure it's, that Great One's own child. Every Great One loses a child and therefore seeks, and seeks. Therefore, this brought about the encounter with the pale moon. And that became the beginning of Hunters and the Hunter's Dream. So there you go. That's why I wanted to bring this up, because this specific third umbilical cord, which we found in the abandoned old workshop, speaks of the history of the creation of the Hunter's Dream. So, and it's tying it in to the desire for Great Ones to seek the replacement for lost children. So, I've already said, this is a little bit of a spoiler still, but I don't mind bringing it up again, because it's sort of unclear. I've already said that there's a Great One associated with the Hunter's Dream. So presumably that Great One lost a child, was seeking a replacement, and for some reason, presumably this third umbilical cord, right? This is the classic, what exactly is being referred to when you get terms like this or that in Japanese in the description of a thing like Bloodborne, right? But I think we can say that this third umbilical cord, because of the yearning that the Great One had for a child, right? And remember, this string of eyes is something that's associated with the children of Great Ones, because only the children of Great Ones have them, brought about the encounter with the pale moon, right? Or the blued moon, if we want to be very literal. But come on. Paled moon or pale moon, I think both are, like, all of those terms could work. I think pale moon is just the most, I was going to say appropriate, but it's the coolest sounding, right? It's the most evocative. There's a good word for it, right? And I think that counts for something. So I'm just going to stick with pale moon, right? So it brings down the pale moon. We're getting another thing that's summoning a moon, right? And potentially of importance, it's a pale moon and not a red moon, right? We're going to need to pay attention to that, right? We think of Old Yharnam, right? Old Yharnam, the red moon is close, and therefore beasts are filling the streets. Are we left no other choice than to burn it all to cinders? This chord brought about an encounter with the pale moon, right? Is that the same moon, or is it a different moon? I don't know. I have no idea. This is where this sort of gets back to what I was talking in the last episode about the Soul Seed blog and color symbology of like red versus pale and blue. This is part of where you can draw that argument. And I'm not entirely sure what to make of all that. Again, this is the sort of thing that goes over my head, but I want to bring that up as a possibility because I've read it now, and now I can share it with you. And this encounter with the pale moon became the beginning of Hunters and the Hunter's Dream. So now we're getting a little bit of an explanation why we have the abandoned old workshop and we have this place that looks very much like it. Not exactly, but very much like it. Because it seems to have been based off of what was happening in what I want to call reality, right? The other version of Yharnam. And shaped somehow into this hunter's dream that became the home base for the hunters. And we already know that Gehrman was instrumental in putting together the hunters, right? We already know from, where's our sword? We have it equipped, so we have to, here we go, right? Ludwig, when he founded the Healing Church Workshop, departed from the ways of aged Gehrman, right? In order to hunt a different sort of beast, right? So Ludwig marked a shift in the hunt, but Gehrman was the one who had set the standard before him. So Gehrman is associated with the beginning of the Hunters. He's also described himself as an advisor, a friend to the Hunters, right? So these are all things that we can keep in mind. And also of note here, right? It became the beginning of the Hunters in general, right? So Gehrman, and he's also calling out to Laurence, right? So Gehrman and Laurence seem to have done something in that abandoned old workshop that caused the creation of this dream, and that involved the starting of the Hunters as an organization. And now, we're the only choice. There are no other Hunters of the Dream. And this is the other thing, right? There's sort of a tendency that I want to do, at least, and probably other people, just projecting, I guess, of thinking of there being hunters in general, right? The sorts of people who are out going around the streets of Yharnam that are unaffiliated with the Dream, that have basically transformed into beasts because they don't have the protection of the Dream, right? You can see why the foundation of this Dream might be tied in with the origin of the Hunters. But I tend to think of like, oh, everybody who goes out on the night of the hunt to kill beasts is a hunter, and then there's Hunters of the Dream, and the Hunters of the Dream are their own category. By implication from that item description, it sort of seems like the Hunters could only really start as an organization because of the footing they had in the Hunter's Dream. But then again, there's also the Healing Church Hunters, and the Healing Church Hunters aren't based out of a dream. They're based out of the Healing Church Workshop, and they're all transformed now. But then again, there are no other Hunters of the Dream, right? We're the only hunter right now associated with the Dream, and at the very beginning of the game, you get the line from the doll, you found yourself a hunter, as if someone was in dire straits, really looking for hunters, and we happened to fit the bill, right? How many hunters are there? What sort of organization is this? Not entirely unclear, very unclear. Some of this, I think, gets filled in by the DLC, but not everything. So, anyway, there's a lot to think about there, and I'll throw it out there, right? You can keep thinking about it. We'll revisit some of this later on, because we're going to get a little bit more information towards the end of the game about the events that led to what's going on here in the Hunter's Dream. Again, not exactly going to answer all our questions, but will give us more than we have. And having done all of that, it's finally time. We're going to do what I thought we'd start the episode with. We're going to talk to Imposter Yusefka back at the clinic. Okay, we are back in the clinic. Let me just make sure I've still got that. Yep, portable lantern still on. And remember how I said to keep in mind that those doors were open? They are now closed. So even though we came in the back way and we killed all the aliens and we talked to the imposter and we said we'd cooperate, she hasn't left the doors open. The doors are now closed again. And once again, we have the option of speaking with the imposter. So let's see what she has to say now that she's sort of reestablished control here.
Oh, hello. Still alive, are you? I need more patience. There aren't many humans left, I know, but find me every last one you can. We must find a way to surpass our own stupidity. You're one of the bright ones. Don't you see how much this means? Yes.
Very interesting. Also some great translation work. The idea that you're one of the bright ones is just so good, right? Because we're going to get more lines from this character, and she very much thinks along those sorts of lines. But also, the idea, like, because it literally, if I remember the Japanese correctly, it's something like, you too understand, right? But what's, again, I was talking about this with the Oedon Chapel Dweller. What's the purpose of the line? The purpose of the line is, we're working together now, right? You see the significance of my work, right? I asked you to stop if you could see the significance of my work, and you stopped. So now, when I'm talking to you, I understand you know the significance of the work, and you're willing to help me. And I need as many patients. I need anyone you can send me. We're getting low, like the Oedon Chapel Dweller was saying, right? Sounds like nobody's left in Yharnam. I know we're getting low, but anyone else you can find, send them here. I need more practice. I need more things to work on. And she's looking to further her knowledge of the world, right? And she knows that we'll help her. And because we've demonstrated our willingness to work with her, she's saying, you're one of the bright ones, right? Serves that narrative function. And it's relatively subtle what that gets you, but I think it really fits the character and it really fits the storyline, because it's this idea that, okay, now the two of you have a secret, which you do, right? Like, you uncovered what is going on with her work that she was trying to hide from you. And now, even though you had that revelation, and a lot of people would probably go along with that, right? They would probably not go along with it. They probably would reject that. Said the opposite of what I meant to say. Whatever. A lot of people would just be horrified and shut her down or try and kill her or whatever. There's a reason she wanted to keep this secret. But we've shown, no, actually, we've seen the secret and we're going to keep it. We're just going to go back to the way things were before. You know, we go around and find people and send them to the imposter, now with full knowledge. So the idea that we're one of the bright ones, the people who see the problem, who see the significance of her work, which if she's able to continue it, she says, will allow us to transcend our stupidity, or whatever the exact line is, right? We know the truth, right? Essentially, that is the most important thing. We can see that significance. And so I really like, because you too understand, right? Like, that's such a standard sort of Japanese line for like something to translate. Again, it's another one of those sort of generic things that I've talked about with her translations, the translation of her dialogue before. And before I was talking about differentiation just essentially for the sake of differentiation, and the way that you get it is by reading into the line. Here, I think you're actively benefiting from reading into the line because of the awareness of the surrounding circumstances. And again, this is something that I'm not sure they could pull off if all they had was the text, right? Because we know the textual information, they don't get as much of a back and forth with the developers. They probably wouldn't have had as strong of a sense of the purpose of these lines. But the fact that this is voice lines, the fact that they probably did have that information and they were able to sort of read into the situation and understand, that allowed them to craft that line in just such a way as to show that, you and I, we know what's going on here. You're one of the bright ones. And it's the same sort of manipulation. This is why I say it fits the character, right? It's the same sort of manipulation that she was giving us before, right? She was coming up and saying, oh, I'm counting on you, right? You have to go out and save these people. You're their only hope, right? I'll put up some of the actual lines in editing, right? But this sort of manipulation almost, this way of talking to our character just to further her aims, very in line with this character. So it's a strong sense of character, it's a strong sense of narrative purpose, really brings out what's going on with the storyline, I think, and just very fitting translation all around. And it replaces some otherwise pretty generic text, I think. So I love it. And it's one of the things that I wanted to show off from this storyline, because I'm never going to get that dialogue in Translation Born. So I just wanted to sort of highlight what I think is a great bit of translation work. Let's just make sure there's not a repeated dialogue, and then I think it's actually been long enough. I'm going to end the episode. I thought this was where it was all going to start, but whatever. Let's find out about the last dialogue here.
If you find any humans, bring them to me. I'm depending on you, brave hunter.
Oh, that'll save me maybe a little bit of work later on, because look at that. I'm depending on you, brave hunter. It's the same sort of thing she was giving us before, right? Her character hasn't changed. The way that she talks to us is some special person, right? It's a consistent tactic of hers, and it works. We're totally doing exactly what she wants. I've made the choice to do that, but still. Anyway, next time, I'm going to warp back to the Forbidden Woods. Actually, I'm gonna head there now, and I'll just say goodbye then, because this episode's gone on fairly long. We talked about a decent amount of lore and translation and stuff like that. We haven't made a lot of progress, but we are at the point now where we can essentially return to the Forbidden Woods, pick up where we left off, and get going again. So let's get right up to that point, and then we'll call it for the evening. Okay, here we are in the Forbidden Woods. And I remembered, thankfully, we had enough loading screens. I'm glad I did it this way. I remembered that I wanted to very briefly go back to the idea of the note, the invitation. Here we go, the Canehurst summons. This particular item, I was saying how there's a physical explanation that you can come to if you're not inclined to think of its appearance on our sickbed, essentially, as just a mysterious way that the world works. If you're inclined to give it a physical explanation, Big Gubosu pointed out once again, thank you for the reminder, that the idea is tied to the fact that the only thing that changes about the clinic is that the imposter shows up. And the imposter is associated with Canehurst. Not only do we get, not only do we get Numbing Mist as a reward for sending patients to her, which Numbing Mist is associated with the Blood Hunters of Canehurst. They're the ones who use this, and it was... Does it say it was made there? Yes. Okay. So only one particular clan in the castle, presumably the Castle Canehurst, right, know the way to formulate this. So this is a strongly tied to Canehurst sort of item. And not only do we get that as a reward for sending people to the Imposter Doctor, but also if we do go up the staircase when she challenges us and take that fight, she will throw Numbing Mist at us, right? That's one of the items she can use in combat. So she's associated with Canehurst Castle through this item. We have an invitation to Canehurst Castle. It shows up on our sickbed. The only person who has access to that particular sickbed is Imposter Yosefka. So maybe she's some sort of accomplice to Canehurst in this invitation, and she just put that letter down there, and we pick it up, and look, it's our name, it's this invitation, it's the summons, but it doesn't completely make sense, right? It's still a little bit of a stretch. It's there because it can be, right? You can draw that line. I still don't like it. She seems really surprised that we managed to find the back entrance. That doesn't seem like a planned thing. If she intended to give us the summons, why wouldn't she just give us the summons, right? It's not impossible to pass items through that door. We get, or not imposter, we get the regular Yosefka's blood vial through it, right? it could have been handled that way. No, I think it's just supposed to be an unexplained, mysterious thing that this impossible thing happens, right? Something is addressed to us, it shows up on our sickbed, and it's a mysterious aspect of the world that doesn't really have a great explanation. In my mind, it doesn't really have a great explanation. And if you want to ask as to physically why that's going on, that's a little bit like asking where the Looney Tunes characters keep their hammers behind their backs, right? It's just weird fiction has weird things that happen, and sometimes they can't be explained. Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. But that's, that's a take it or leave it sort of thing. Eye of the beholder. Whichever story makes more sense to you, whichever one sounds better, right? That's the one that you can go with. But I did want to bring up, because I did get the reminder, that is the physical explanation for how this note could have gotten there. Anyway, having remembered that, having given that last piece of information off, I'm going to call it into my hunt for the evening. I look forward to making some more progress through the Forbidden Woods next time. And in the meantime, thank you very much for watching, and I wish all of you good hunting.